The Sui Dynasty. The rise of the Sui Dynasty was that they built the Great Wall of China, which was a protection from the north. The success was that they built a Grand Canal, which was a waterway that helped trade and also fed many people. Their decline was the things that they built was very expensive, so they spent too much money. Their fall was that the people revolted not only because they were forced to build the Great Wall, but also because many people died, and they turned against the government and overthrew them.
The Tang Dynasty. The Tang ruled for almost 300 years and had the first empress of China, Wu Zhao. Wu Zhao was the real ruler for a long time, but there were many emperors who went and came during her reign. They restored the bureaucracy and had a civil service, had an exam so they could take to get higher spots in the government. They also had a law code that helped keep economic order. In the Tang society, only the rich people could get a good education, and women weren't seen as of any help to the social being of the family. They expanded the networks of roads and canals that the Sui had begun, conquered the north, and that gave them the Silk Roads, which was very important because it helped in trade, which helped the economy. They had imposing taxes, and that resulted in the people revolting. That was the beginning of their fall, and also how they were being constantly attacked by other peoples. The final hit was when the Chinese rebels sacked and burned the Tang capital and killed the next emperor, who was only a child.
The Song Dynasty. The rise for the Song Dynasty was that they invented a compass and mechanical clock which allowed them to trade by sea instead of by land. They had to do this because they lost the Silk Roads. Their success was their high speed of rice, which was an advancement in agriculture, and the rice grew twice as fast, which increased the populations because many people got fed. Their decline was that they cut spending and lowered taxes because they saw what the Tang Dynasty did, so they lowered taxes, and by this they didn't have a strong enough military, which made them very weak. Their fall was that they weren't strong enough and the Mongols conquered.
The Mongols had a very strong army under the command of Genghis Khan. They wore silk underwear to protect them. It helped because if an arrow was shot at them and pierced the skin, the silk would help the warrior take out the weapon cleanly. He was a political and military genius, improving the Mongolian army's performance. He imposed stability and law and order across Eurasia. The Mongolian army also had many horses and lived on yurts, which are like mobile tents that the army would live in while fighting. Then the Pax Mongolia started. The Pax Mongolia was important because it guaranteed safe passage for trade caravans, travelers, and trade from one side of the empire to the other. The Mongolians were very good horseback riders because they were nomads before they actually became a society, and the strategy they had was to switch horses when they were tired and get fresh ones, which helped them become more fierce warriors. They had a very organized military, which is separated into a 10,000-man army, a 1,000-man brigade, 100-man companies, and 10-man squads. This helped them conquer many places. They conquered the Chinese, and this also helped them because they traded with the Chinese for ideas, gunpowder, and inventions. The decline of the Mongols was because they spent so much money on having a strong army and public works that they overtaxed the people, which resulted in a revolt. The empire was separated into 4 khanates. The empire was divided into Ilkhanate, which was Persia, Khanate of the Great Khan, Mongolia, China, Khanate of Changtai, Central Asia, and Khanate of the Golden Horde, Russia. Each was ruled by a descendant of
The Yuan Dynasty. The rise of the Yuan Dynasty was that Kublai Khan united China by conquering them and rose to power. The success was that he extended the Grand Canal to Beijing, which increased their trade, and he also tolerated the Chinese culture. Their decline was once Kublai Khan conquered China, he tried to expand his rule to Japan, so he sent his men to fight against them, and he lost men to the Mongols. He kept the Chinese from being high government officials, which didn't make the Chinese happy. Their fall was from sending the troops to Japan. They lost troops, and because of this, people had to pay high taxes for the army that they had lost. So that made people angry. Another thing that made people even angrier was their hard labor laws. Also, because they didn't have a lot of people in their military, they weren't strong enough to put down the people's revolts.
The Yamato had a monarchy and emperor. They also accepted Buddhism and Chinese writing style. These were important factors because that meant they could increase trade and that improves the economy. They failed to have an exam for the government, so they just resumed to having the leading families in charge. They ended up getting conquered by both the Fujiwara and the Kamakura, but both kept them in charge as figurehead emperors. The Fujiwara had an imperial court and moved their capital to Tokyo. They had feudalism. Large landowners ruled like kings of their own independent nations because they had private armies and the land turned lawless and dangerous. Usually the small landowners would give their piece of land to the big names for protection from others. In this society, the upper class was very important. The amount of skirts a woman wore was very important as well as the sword length. The reason that this civilization declined was because the central government was beginning to slip and there was no one to keep the peace anymore. The Kamakura civilization. They had a shogun, and the shogun was the leader of all samurai. They controlled the empire. Samurai were from the Bushido, and they were all loyal warriors. Bushido was the code of samurai, generous to the weak and fairness. Dying honorably is better than living a long life. Samurai protected the peasants, then the peasants paid the samurai. They are similar to a knight with chivalry, but many of samurai would abuse of their power and will make people pay them more than they should or would threaten the people as well. The Khmer civilization. Their capital was Angkor Wat. They conquered neighboring kingdom and created irrigation systems and waterways. Angkor Wat was a city and temple complex dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, and it also was an observatory, advancing science and math. They improved rice cultivation, creating leisure time, and that meant that people had more time to make cool inventions. Had an irrigation system that helped them make it possible for more rice to grow in the same area, and they became prosperous, and were self-sustaining, were able to grow 3 or 4 crops of rice a year.
The Dai Viet dynasty. The Li dynasty was the dynasty they ruled. They adopted Chinese culture and broke away from the Tang dynasty. They had a strong army, which was strong enough to stop the Mongols. They improved roads and transportation by river, which helped trade. Their agriculture was very good, which meant that they had a good economy and a strong army because people were well fed.
The Salandria civilization. They were an agricultural kingdom, which was important because they could help themselves with trading the rice, and also the population increase and their strength increase. They ruled the Strait of Malacca around the island of Sumatra. They had a Buddhist temple at Borobudur, and they took and traded with people who passed through their waters. Srivijaya ruled the Strait of Malacca as well, and other waters around the island of Sumatra, Borneo, and Java. They grew wealthy by taxing trade through those waters, and their capital was Palembang on Sumatra. It became a great center of Buddhist learning, and the island of Singapore, the Sunda Strait, and Malay Peninsula were very important. All these civilizations needed a strong military.
The Silla dynasty came before the Koryu dynasty. The Koryu dynasty. They had a strong central government, a civil service system, which meant that people had to take an exam to get a job, but only the sons of nobility could take the exam. This meant that the poor people got angry because they didn't have the same opportunity as the sons of nobility. The government was not as effective as it could have been because they were only picking from a smaller group with less amount of people. When the Mongols came, they didn't kill them if they paid them tribute. The tribute was 20,000 horses, clothes for 1,000,000 soldiers, and they took the children and artisans as slaves, but they were still able to survive. They soon became weak because of all the taxes they were paying and then got conquered by the Chosen dynasty.